Ruby on Rails. Today, we're going to create a simple Rails application that allows you to make posts. Simple things. We're going to have objects that you can create, read, update, or delete, and we're going to talk about how to implement this as an API as we continue our conversation about application programming interfaces. Now, application programming interfaces essentially allow the front end of an application to communicate with the back end of the application, right? So if we have a database, we access that database from our back end programming language, which could be Ruby, which is the language for Ruby on Rails, or it could be PHP, Node.js, it could be whatever backend programming language. So the database communicates with the backend programming language, which then can send JSON, which is just text with information, over to a client computer for the front end, right? And the idea is we use a thing called MVC, or Model View Controller, to kind of organize all of this by splitting our application into 3 components. And Ruby on Rails is a framework that really supports this model. So let's talk about each area. So we have the model, and these are the things that communicate with our database. In this case, in our example, we're going to be using MongoDB. So, and then we have our views, which essentially is our HTML and the Rails that we embed in it, which is really a part of a thing called Ruby HTML, or our HTML, that we can include within our HTML to pass data from our database that come from our models. And the views and the models communicate through a thing called controllers. And our controllers are simply things that accept requests from the user, determine the appropriate model to manipulate, and then determine what view to show based on model information. All right, and so we're going to take a look at all of these areas of the MVC, and it will help to understand MVC to understand Ruby on Rails. And then we will turn around and tie that all into our MarkNet application. And we will continue using PHP to show a user login. And once we log in a user, we will then make an API call to our Rails app to get post information. So we'll bring the two together, PHP and Ruby, in this example. So for our people more experienced with PHP can understand a little bit more about Rails, and people who are just completely new can understand kind of what both languages look like. And this will be through our MarkNet application as an example, because we love to use real examples. So if you're not familiar with MarkNet, it's an application being used in South Korea, which allows you to shop for items through Instagram photos. And last week, we took a look at API calls that will allow a user to do many things like log in, register, create new items in their collection, and additionally search and along with edit their settings, etc. So we also looked at this Instagram call, in which we can go to our API and access a file called getinsta.php, and it'll give us the last 100 or so photos with all their information from Instagram for a certain user. In this case, the MarkNet application. So we make a call to Instagram's API, and Instagram's backend is what we're accessing, and it looks like Instagram is inside of uses Facebook's infrastructure and a little bit of Amazon Web Services. And so their applications are written in Python. So they have a Python backend through Zookeeper that essentially creates this output. So the idea is that it doesn't necessarily matter what is creating the output because it's coming out as JSON, and then we take that information and then we manipulate it a little bit, but then we essentially just print it out, and so we can use it in other places. What we're going to do today is we're going to build this simple application which allows you to create a new post. So give it a title, hello, there, and then create the post, review the post, look at all the posts, and see the posts based on the date they were created, and even, of course, edit them. Hello, today, there, today. Update the post, and then see hello, there, today. So we're saving these values to our MongoDB database, and we're using Ruby on Rails to get this back. We also use Ruby on Rails to import the Bootstrap, which we're using on the front end. And so this is a full Rails application. But the great thing is that with our Rails application, we can actually get the JSON version of the information. And then we're going to basically output this information from this API endpoint and use that to then grab that info in our MarkNet application and then potentially even save those values. So we'll use a little bit of MongoDB, we'll use a little bit of MySQL. Let's get started. So the first thing we need to do, of course, you've checked to see if you have in your terminal Rails installed. You can do this by typing in ruby-v, and you'll see a Ruby version number. If you don't have it, then you will need to install it. You can simply Google download Ruby and install the application. The idea is to get it in your terminal, whether you're on PC or Mac, that you can type in Ruby, and then you'll get this little hanging. You can push Control-Z to get out of that. All right, now that you're using Ruby on Rails, or rather Ruby, just make sure you have Rails. You can type in Rails, and when you type that in, you should also get this hanging, and then you should see all of your options. If you don't see these, then you will need to go to, and this doesn't come with your computer like Ruby does, so you'll need to go to rubyonrails.org /download and just follow these instructions. Please follow them step by step. Do not skip any of these steps, and so you'll have an easy time. It's sometimes really hard to install Ruby on Rails, especially if it's your first time on a computer, but it's just very important not to take any shortcuts and to take your time. I've seen some people skip some steps, and it can be a real headache, even for experienced developers, to uninstall the version that you installed and reinstall new versions. Which leads me to a thing called RVM, which allows you to manage different versions of Rails. So one thing about Rails that's inconvenient is that is the versioning aspect. It's convenient and inconvenient simultaneously. So newer versions of Ruby as they come out in Rails, Ruby on Rails, are not necessarily compatible with older versions of Ruby. So you will need to know the version of Ruby that you're using, and just it's not backwards compatible. So as it moves forward, applications come out, that might necessarily work on your environment depending on the one you're using, and it's usually important to find those. But then you have a bunch of different gems that support different Ruby versions, and that can be a headache. But they have this RVM which comes with your application, which allows you to easily switch between different versions of Ruby. And that's something a little more advanced later. You shouldn't have to worry about too much, and you won't need it for this part of the application. But if you're going around on GitHub and you're trying to use Rails applications or use Ruby applications, it's going to be important to check that out. So once you have Rails going, what you're going to need to do to make this simplest for everyone, even if you don't have Rails on your computer, that's okay if you can't get it installed, because we're going to use a similar platform between all of us, and we're going to deploy a Rails app to the cloud as well as our local computer. So we'll start with our local computer, but then we will deploy it to the cloud as well, so that we can see this little kind of semi-blog situation that we've created. And to create a Rails application in OpenShift, it's actually interesting. You can't just, as you usually do, go to here, click, for example, on Ruby on Rails, and then just paste a GitHub repository that you find off GitHub, because it doesn't necessarily configure your application the right way. OpenShift has its own environment variables, which are needed to connect to the database and doing a variety of other things. So what's going to be really important is to make sure that you leave their default example there when you create your Rails application. And then you're going to go ahead and you're going to click Create. You can name this application Simple, because that's what it is. It's very simple. So create your application. And this uses MySQL 5.1 by default. We're actually going to we're not going to use that cartridge. In fact, we're going to remove it, but we're going to use MongoDB. So as soon as the application spins up, we're going to add the MongoDB, which is NoSQL, which we covered a little bit recently. But to review, NoSQL is just a database type that does not necessarily use structured or uses semi-structured data, meaning that it doesn't use a relational model in a sense that it does every record in the database doesn't necessarily need to have the same fields. You can have what they call collections in some kinds of NoSQL, which do not have all the same fields for each record. And this can be very convenient for a variety of things, which we will explore. For example, when you're pulling information from an API and you want to create something that can just take that information and then create a collection for you and nest a bunch of information inside of information, and just take a lot of pieces of unsegmented data. If you're doing natural language recognition, this would be very helpful. Netflix for the recommendation engine. This is a very useful thing. But it'll take a few moments for your Rails application to spin up. Give it some time. And once it spins up, like I said, we'll be installing MongoDB. On your client computer, you want to make sure you have that installed. So you can visit mongodb.org/downloads, and you can choose your platform if you're using Mac or Windows. And once you do that, you'll get a zip file. So your zip file will look something maybe, well, you'll have a bunch of, here we go. You'll have a bunch of files like this, okay? Make sure you move them from inside of bin. You'll need to follow the instructions and make sure, whether you're on Windows or Mac, that these are in the appropriate folder. And if you're having issues, for example, if you can't at the end of the day just type in Mongo or MongoD and get some output, if it says command not found, then you can just navigate to the folder that contains these actions, drag that into your terminal or your git bash if you're using PC, and you can run Mongo from there. But don't worry about doing that right now. Once you're ready though, and you have everything installed, you can type in MongoD and be very careful when you enter this in. You're going to want to open up a brand new terminal window, hit MongoD. And I suggest just going ahead and putting sudo in front of that, just making sure, because usually based on the directory you have it in, you'll need to have the appropriate permissions to execute this file. But when you run MongoD, if you run sudo, of course you'll need to put in your password for your computer. You'll see this waiting for connections on port 27017, and that's how you know it's working. So now I have MongoD working. If you're going to run this on your local, you're going to need to have MongoDB running. And so now that it's everything's up. They're gonna go ahead and give me my username and password and all that. I'm gonna click back on applications. I'm gonna go down to simple, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add a cartridge. So I'm gonna see a list of cartridges I can add. I'm gonna find MongoDB 2.4. Find MongoDB and then click Add Cartridge. And then now that that's added, we'll be golden. Once MongoDB is added, we're going to clone this application into our app folder. So we're going to create a clone of the application. And once we create that clone, we're essentially going to remove all the files. And why are we going to remove all the files? Well, they got Rails up and running for us. So for example, if we click on Simple Tester, they got Rails to start. Rails server is running, and that's the important part. If you try to do an install from someone else's repo directly to just spin up the server, there's a good chance it won't work on OpenShift. So it's very important just to run the Rails app from there with their template, and then you're going to clone it, remove everything, all the files, and then you're going to put the code in there. Now it still might not work, depending, because it might not be compatible for a variety of reasons when you push it up to OpenShift. But that is a best practice as of now for when you're deploying a Rails app to OpenShift, to basically just use their default repo, add your databases, and then go ahead. We're going to get the source code for simple. So you're going to grab that URL that you're going to use to add as your remote. And you can go ahead and you're going to click on your app folder. You're going to drag it into your terminal. And then you're just going to say git clone. You're going to paste the URL. It's going to create simple. Click yes when it asks you. And then once it installs everything, you're going to cd into simple. And once you cd into simple, you can ls, and you'll see. Now this, let me give you a quick tour of a Rails application. So if I click on app, and then we go to simple, the main folder that you're going to be concerned with at all times is the app folder. Most of everything, your models, controllers, and views that we discussed earlier, all mostly reside and occur within here. And then everything else is primarily for configuration purposes. For example, your rake file, your gem file, and the rest of these. Some interesting things about Ruby on Rails is that it already comes enabled with features that make it easy for you to perform tests, which occurs here. As far as the page we just saw on our browser, this page, when we visited our application, this page is stored here in public. So in public, I can have different pages, and that's where they have put my index.html, and also have my 404 in case the page is not found or there's a server error. We have this page. Something went wrong. All right. Now let's focus on the app folder, which is the really important folder. And they have a controllers folder, a views folder, and a models. These are the ones we're most concerned with. The helpers folder are for just global functions, really, that are used throughout the application. Mailers is for sending email, and assets is where you can store a lot of your JavaScript, your CSS, etc. That are used by your views. So you have a lot of HTML and RHTML in here. In your models, you have a bit of Ruby as well. In your controller, you have some configurations around your application. All right. So let's go ahead and just get rid of all of this. So that's a simple Rails app, and this might seem kind of intimidating at first, but once you get to using it, it becomes simply straightforward. It's just a framework, and so it's like a halfway built site, but already built, very organized for you to kind of do what you need. So you're just gonna navigate into and bring simple into your terminal. And remember with that Mongo terminal window, so make sure once you have that running, just go ahead and minimize that so you don't accidentally close it at some point, because it can be a real pain to restart Mongo or to stop it. And if you do at this point, just go ahead and restart your computer if you want to use it. There are ways, just oops, it can be a pain depending on how you have installed it. So if you click, so if you're here in simple, I've pulled this into here. You're going to write RM, which is just remove, and you're going to say RM, and then you can simply say R capital RF, which is all of the files as well. Also, I mean all the folders, and so remove all the files, remove all the folders, push star, push enter ls, and you should see nothing. So everything has been removed, and that's very, very good. And so then you can say git add a, git commit -m, or rather git add -a, because I want to get rid of all my removes. If I just put dot, it won't actually commit all my removes. It'll just commit all the things I have. Git add everything I've done. Git commit -m, and then I'll say emptied. All right, and then all these, delete mode means all these files were deleted. So now I have an empty situation. What I can do now is you can download our sample application through GitHub. So you can go to github.com, and you can find us at CodeCloud.me and click on repositories, and you'll see that we have a Rails Mongo REST API basic. So this is the one. So github.com/codecloudme/Rails Mongo REST API basic. You can actually just, to make things simple, you can download this zip file. So you can just download that. And once you download that, you can show it in your Finder. Usually we clone this stuff, but we just need the files actually. We don't really care about all the other stuff. You can copy all these files. This is all the stuff you'll need, and then you can put it inside of your simple folder. So then paste that into simple, and that's it. If you would like to run this, you can simply take simple, drag it into your terminal, and you're going to run Rails server, and it's going to run a Rails server. So if I wait a little while, simple will actually run. And so now, if I go to my local host, port 3000, which is the default port, with my MongoDB running, here we go. And there are my posts that I even have put in before, because I have my MongoDB running. You won't see any posts because I'm connecting to the same database from the same port, but you can enter in information and push create posts, and it will actually add it, and you'll have these endpoints. So let's talk about these endpoints. So this is what the a thing called routes handles. So the fact that I can go to /posts and then this unique identifier, which they automatically generate whenever I create an item in the database, which is also very cool. How this all works is dealt in a file in your config. So inside simple, you have a config folder, and in here you have a routes RB, and this is the most important, in my opinion, file in here. In addition to your Mongo, which doesn't come by default, we've added this Mongo ID. So if you drag this into your Sublime Text, you'll see here that we have a route path for to go to the post view, and basically this is essentially this tells it what controller to use. So we're telling it to use this controller, and we can go here back into the most important folder, which we discussed was app, and look at our controller, and we can see our posts, for example, controller. So let's say we wanted to create a new item. We wanted a new item, and we wanted to add it. If you'd like to get a comprehensive tutorial on all of this, you can actually go to the same repo that you copied or that you download the zip file from, we've left a lot of instructions in here, but there's also this really great link down here at the bottom, which can be very, very helpful, and it's on OpenShift.com, and it's pretty awesome if you want to do a lot of this stuff from scratch, as opposed to just pulling down our repo where we have everything kind of prepackaged for you. You can do that. It's really great, but they have a thing called scaffolding. So essentially, you can create an object or a page or a controller view and models all with this one command. So for example, and when you're running your Rails server, for example, you want to minimize that as well. So you want to have your MongoDB and your Rails kind of minimized so you don't accidentally close out of them. Like I said, that can be a pain. Because when you close out of them, you'll kill the process, which is one thing, and that'll just that won't be necessarily a good thing. You're not probably gonna like that. All right, so here we go. Here we are. If I want to, just for example, create a new a new object. For example, let's say I want to create store items. Okay, so that's what I'm actually going to just go ahead and create store items. So I'm going to say Rails. I'm going to call the Rails application G global scaffold, and then I'm going to say posts. So I could say posts. I could say we're going to create items for the store. So I'm going to say item. And then I'll have my items. And then I'll have a title, and instead of body, I'll have a description. And of course, I'll have a created at, and this will be a date. And I'll have an updated at, and this will be a date. And I'll have, let's say, we'll just make it simple. So if you want to create that, you just click enter, and then it actually will create for you the models view of the controllers. That's something really cool about Rails that makes it pretty powerful, is that you can use this scaffold method, and it will run all of this. So it'll invoke Mongo ID, which is the connector or the driver for our MongoDB. But it'll create all these files for us in a very organized fashion for our CSS, everything that we want for this particular thing. And so over here now, we'll have the items controller, which we can pull down, and we can actually now make API calls, do anything to create an item, to destroy an item. And so here in our controller, we have all of these abilities, and so we have our def index, which you noticed before in our routes we might route to, and then we have items. So we've created this object .all, so we can see this will show us all of the items. So if you go to get /items, so if you say /items or /items JSON, it'll show you all of them. If you, for example, want to create a new item, you can go to items /new. To create an item, and you can, if you send in information to here, you'll be able to do that, or rather, so excuse me, items. You can then create the items, and then update to actually send out information or destroy, etc. So it adds all of this for you in the controller, and it manipulates, and it also creates your models, which deals directly with your database. So here now I have a post.rb, which is written in Ruby, and it has includes my Mongo ID document, and then it creates. I have all of this right here, which my type dates that I specified, etc. And I can actually add things. So as far as like the database is concerned, with models, I can just add them directly in here through the code, and I can just send in that information. So for example, now if I go to localhost, now what I'll need to do, of course, is I'll need to grab Rails. So Rails is different from Node. As we saw last week with Node, I can, as soon as I make an edit, because of the runtime, it just goes ahead and it's a part of the server. It just works. With Rails, I actually have to Control C. Make sure you push Control C, not Control Z, and then I'll actually have to start the server up again in order to see that change. So I'll wait for a few moments. And so all the views, everything was created for me, so I can easily now use Rails to, for example, say localhost 3000/items, and I can click new item, and I can actually go ahead and say we're going to add a linen sheet, and description for the linen sheet from Ralph Lauren. Why not? Ralph Lauren. Example, best sheets. It's awesome, these sheets. You're going to love these sheets. All right, and then I can go ahead and just create the item. And we have a few errors. Attempted to set a value for created at is not allowed on the model item. We'll take a look at this error later. The element that we're focusing on right now is posts, which is for our through our example. And so as we take a look, and we've actually imported Bootstrap for this. Another thing that you'll need to do before you run your application, so if I run Control C, is you'll need to make sure that you've installed all the gems. So you want to write gem install, or rather you'll specify the name, but when you add a gem, you'll run gem install. So now let's get this up on OpenShift. You can run to openshift.com/Red Hat, and then once you get here and you've logged in, etc., you can simply navigate to obviously you click out, you added your application already, and the name of the application is simple. So you can run over here to simple, and of course you're going to grab this source code URL like you did before, and you can go ahead and add a git commit m in your simple. So added items, and then you can do a git remote add, and so this will be OpenShift. So I'll say OpenShift. So I'll add that repo, that remote repo, and then I can say git push OpenShift master. So let's push to the master branch, and it will actually push all of simple back up, and that's how you actually get it running on your server here. So now this will be running. So as you can see, when you first click on it, you'll see this. Once it pushes everything up, it'll say service temporarily unavailable while it's spinning everything up and going through the processes. This can take a few minutes, so give that some time, but then you should be able to do that. And so take a look through that. So now let's take a look at how we could potentially pull some of our post information or our items information into MarkNet app. So we have a front end where people could be sitting around adding information about items or where they're being sold, etc., through our Ruby, the Ruby on Rails portion of our application, and then they can turn around and people who are actually accessing the MarkNet application can make calls to the MarkNet API, and our API can actually make a query to our Rails API on another server, get that information, and then push it back. So let's talk a little bit about that. So we're going to take a look here at our MarkNet lean. So we were on GitHub, and we had a repo called MarkNet lean, which you can check out. If you haven't cloned it already, please do. You'll need this for the example. So codecloudme/MarkNet lean, github.com/codecloudme. And then in our repository section, you'll see our MarkNet lean. You can create that repo. You can follow previous videos to see how to get the MySQL tables all up and installed, so that you can rather import it so that you can use them to follow along. So settings is where we store our user information, orders.sqls, all of our orders, etc. We're going to create a new model, and a new API call for posts on MarkNet, just as an example. And then we can add other things in the future that are more relevant to the application. So if we go and to our MarkNet project and pull that folder into Sublime Text, we will see our cloud folder, which is the one that we're most focused on, and we'll see our models. So as we saw last week, we have our main models, which is all of our stuff, all of our main imports for our database credentials. You might have wondered in our Rails application where our database credentials were. Aha! You can look more into the GitHub tutorial, or rather our README file, to understand more about that, and also the link I shared earlier on OpenShift, which we also have in the GitHub repo. But it's a little different. But we explicitly give our username and password here in settings, which we have here, and then so let's go ahead and create a model that will make a API call to our server. So inside MarkNAD-lean, you can navigate to that folder, and we're going to cloud models. And for now, so Rails, we're not going to Rails. We just say scaffold, and we can just create all of this stuff for us, and then we can just edit it. But here, in just using PHP without really much of a framework in place, except for our helpers, which we have in Rails, or our global functions that really help us out, we can basically set, which are all stored mostly in main. We can basically just go and find something that's most similar. So we have, let's see, settings. Actually, let me make sure I have the latest version. So I'm going to go to app, and then I'm going to click on MarkNAD, pull down MarkNAD-lean into my terminal, and I can see all the remotes. So git remote v, and so we have open git. So I believe it's this one. So I'll say git pull open git master. And so I'll get all the latest. So yeah, I just got some new files. Great, I got the beta. All right, so I'm up to date now. So I'll have more in my models. Great. So I have now beta sign up, etc., like we did last week. So let's say I want to do log in a user. So we do that in settings in our models. And I'll explain this code. So let's have a little PHP tutorial. So I'm requiring one. So this is a global PHP function, which allows us to use another global variable to get the document root, or where our web server originates from, and then add a path. We use dot instead of the plus sign like we use in JavaScript to append a string to another string, and then I close that out, always using a semicolon, obviously, at the end. And then right here, instead of a test folder like I have in Rails, I actually just run my tests directly, or you can with PHP. And they have other tools where it allows you to do it in a different way. And so then I have just functions. So we have a create account, and then I have, and so this one, for example, will actually take a user info array as the parameter, and then we will encapsulate everything in the function is inside of this. Inside of these squigglies or curly braces. And so you say function to create a function or set of functionality in PHP. And this is for classes and methods, or methods within a class. And we'll get more into that soon as we talk a little bit more about object-oriented programming in a future tutorial. But then I have if statements. So in PHP I just say if. This exclamation mark means not. So if not is set is a global PHP variable. I have the $ in front of my variables here. The $ in PHP simply means that there is a variable, which can be, for example, as we did in Rails, we had data types, so we had string or date, etc. This can be an integer, it can be a string, but in this case, this is a string. So, or rather, this is the user info parameter, which I declare up here. So anything that calls create account and sends in information, whatever information it's using, this function recognizes it as user info. So for example, every time I use user info here, which is the array the user sends in, I'm actually accessing the array that was from whoever invoked this function. So create account, they sent in blah blah hashtag dollar sign blah blah, and blah blah is now user info according to this function. So whatever is sent in to user info is actually interpreted as the term user info in here. So that's how that works. And so then we have now when I want to specify an element within user info, I just use these square brackets, and then I can input a string. So I want the email element, and if it's not set, then I can send back an array. So to invoke an array in PHP, we simply say the word array, and then we send key, and then we use this little sign here, equal sign, and then a greater than sign to point to fail, and then the reason, and then I return that response. So I'm setting response equal to this array that I've created, and then I return it, and this terminates the function, and then it basically sends this back to whatever is invoking create account. And so then I do the same thing for password. So this is just basically validation to make sure there's an email and password that's sent in the array, and then I'll create a random string. So I have a function down here called random string, which I'm using up here, which essentially creates a random string of 24 characters for a user. And then I encrypt the password. I use an MD5 function to do that in PHP. It's very easy to use MD5 to encrypt a password using hashing, which is irreversible in a sense that people can't use an algorithm to decode it. You actually, or rather, you need. We'll talk about more when we go into security about hashes and things of that nature as far as encryption and data security. Then here I have I'm setting just a bunch of variables. And we use this function a lot. This is a function that we use a lot in PHP, dbMassData. It's not a global. You have to import it. So when we import this file up here, this file actually imports this function, which is dbMassData, which returns to us an array or a set of information, as we saw up here, based on a querying. So sending in this SQL query, which we talked about earlier. So we're saying select all from the settings table. So we're going into the table. So in MySQL we have tables instead of collections, right? So we're using a relational database to send in a query, and we're checking for the email. So in PHP, you don't actually have to split up the string to represent a variable. You can just literally inside of a string use the dollar sign, and it will be recognized as the variable. So this is very awesome. So I'll select all from settings where email is equal to the email that's sent in up here that we've defined when we said that email would be equal to whatever the user info email was, and then we return the account information, or we send that back that's if we log in the user. And so if the user exists, then this select will not be equal to null. So this is checking to see if the user exists already in the database. If they do, we try to log them in, and login function will basically try to log them in. So and then we'd use role add, which will basically take all the user info, and it will. And this is also in our DB shortcuts, which is included up here in our main PHP file, in a function inside of that file. And then we have a few parameters which we set, and you can learn more about this role add by looking at the code in DB shortcuts in your models /DB folder. And then we have resp, which is a variable which is set equal to an array of status success. So the reason this will show up is, for example, if anything else happens, it will return here. And then let's take a look at login user. For example, we'll say select all from settings where email is equal to email, password is equal to pass. So what this does is, this is simple validation. We're going to the settings and we're looking for where the email is equal to email and the password is equal to the password. What we do to check the password, since it's encrypted, is when we receive the password, we re-encrypt it, right? So we encrypt the password when we receive it, and then so it'll match the encrypted password or the hashed password that we have in our database. And so that's how we check for that. So we check these values, and if this is equal to null, then that means that no one has that same username and password. But if someone does have that same username or that same email and password, then you have a status success, and we use that as our response. Now, we have this thing called session ID, which is the beginning of actually starting our session. So these two used in tandem is how we start a session. And a session is essentially a connection between a server and a client, or rather Facebook.com, for example, or MarkNAD, our servers, and the user's phone. That is a connection so that whenever the user sends a request, they will have session information attached to that request. In this case, we're setting the session variable, and this is a global variable for PHP. but we're setting the user ID and we're setting the RID and the email so that we can use these elements anywhere that the user accesses, whether they try to access posts, whether they try to access creating items. Whenever this particular client who is logged in on this computer accesses, when we use session ID and session start, we're going to use the database information. So a user account is all the information we got from the database, and so we set, once we validate it that they are a user and have correct credentials. And the reason they'll have correct credentials is because we've selected all from settings, which is the table where we store the emails and passwords, where the email is equal to the email they sent, and the password is equal to the password they sent. Again, they send in a physical password, and then we MD5 encrypt that password using the global variable MD5. Once we do that, we return the response, meaning we send it back, and the user's logged in. And the great thing is the session is created so that, and so that's how we deal with sessions. So take a look at this code. This will be very, very important. And we'll cover more about sessions and user login, of course, in future tutorials. So now that we've covered a little bit of this, of course, we can go to, we can query our API. So we can go to, for example, marknad lean, and then we can send in, for example, user add if I use the correct username and password, or rather, so I just created an account. So wonderful. If I push enter again, it'll actually log me in, because as you can see here, we say the reason we get two different responses is the first time exists is not equal to null, so we actually add all of my user info to the settings table, and then we send back a status success, and that's what we saw before. But the second time it said, wait, this person exists, so then it said log in this user with his username and unencrypted password, and then we send in the password, we encrypted it, and tried to check to see. So that's kind of how that works, and why, for example, if you hit this twice, you'll get different responses if you access this part of the API. So we can send this information, this JSON encoded data, back to our application, and we'll talk more in the next video about how we actually use this information to then do other stuff. But let's go ahead and create something that can actually, from our PHP, that can communicate with our Rails application and actually show us all of those posts. And so all we'll be doing is relaying information, and we'll conclude with that. So I'm going to navigate over to OpenShift, and I'm going to go ahead, since I went ahead and spun everything up here. Here's this. Yours should be blank, so go ahead and create new and say something like hello and then goodbye, and go ahead and create that post. Right, and then click back, and then you should see your post. And so once you see your post and everything, and it's all good, hit .json, and so this will be the JSON encoded version of what you're receiving. And so I want you to copy this URL, and what I want you to do is you can, inside your mouse, you can push Command-Shift-N, and then in here you can say posts, so create a post, and drag that into your terminal. Push Command N to create a new file, and then you can push Command-Shift-S to save the file, and it'll try to save it into the settings folder. Don't set it there. You want to put it in the models folder. And so you will save it rather in the post folder within models, and you can save this as index.php, or you can just create an index.php file inside of your post folder, and inside of there you're going to write PHP, and this is how you write, of course, PHP. You always start with a less than sign and then the query or question mark sign, and this is going to be very simple. All we're going to do is we're going to say rest equals, and we're going to say file get contents, and then you're just going to paste the URL, and then you're going to say echo response. And that's it. I know. Or rather, you're not going to echo the response. You're going to return the response. And then what you're going to do is you're going to place this inside of a function, and you're going to call this get posts, and you can place that there. So you have a function called get posts, and the file should look like this. So you're setting the variable equal to file get contents of your URL, and then you're returning that response. Okay? And you can put PHP up here like that. And you're creating a function by just writing the word function. In Rails, you just say def, or in Python, for example, you'll say def. Here you'll say function. In JavaScript, you'll say function to define the function, and then you'll say get posts. And now I'll save that. Once that's saved, I'll run over and I'll go to API. I'll create a new folder. I will call this folder posts. I'll drag it over here. And then in posts, I will use my settings of the template. So I'll drag in index.php from here, and I'll go ahead and copy the require once string, and then I'll create a new file inside of posts. API posts, and I'll call it index.php, and I'll paste our require once, but of course I'll need to include this to let it know that this is where my PHP is, and require once, and I'll go to my document root, which is just the server, the web server root of my application, cloud/models settings index.php, and once that's all good, and I'll need to change this to blogs. So this is the particular model, or rather set of functionality that I'm trying to work with. And so this will give us the function that we created over here, and then I can just say response equals, and this is to keep everything organized, because obviously I could have echoed the response like we almost did do, but that wouldn't be appropriate, because as you build out an application, if you're not just doing something that does one simple thing like that, then you want to keep it organized so all the developers on the team can work together and it can make more sense for everyone. So organization is very important. Rails does this by default, but in PHP, if you're not using a framework or you're using our custom framework, you'll be doing things like this. So this is a good way to learn, for example, the importance of organizing code and also what's happening underneath the hood. And both tools can be useful. And in fact, that's why we want to bring the Rails and the PHP developers together. We're just sharing input and output between our servers. Potentially we can do this. We can also run them simultaneously side by side for different aspects of applications. And so you can say $rest equals, and then we can call our function here, which is get posts, and then we can echo the response, right? And I can save this, and now if you go to posts here, I'll simply go to my terminal. I'll say get add a. I'll make sure you're in marked add lean. I'll add get commit m added posts, and am querying info from the Rails server. And push enter. And then I can just simply do a get push to whatever you named your particular application. So I'll say get remote -b and open get. So get push open get master, and I'll wait a few moments. It'll push it up. It'll take a little while. Of course, the service will be temporarily unavailable, but the idea is now when I navigate to my mark nad lean, which I have over here, so I can go to, for example, and we can click on cloud/API/posts, and when I hit posts, I should see information. Once this is done, All right. Now, something we always talk about in class that's important is that when you do something like this, as a developer, especially if you're new, just expect for it not to work, and this will save you a lot of pain and suffering. So just FYI, sometimes things take time, and peace of mind comes from expecting things not to work. So in this case, we're expecting this not to work, and if it does, we're then really happy. All right, so I'll click posts, and there is no love, and there's absolutely no response. So here I say response is equal to get posts. I'll simply go here and I'll say, first thing I'll do rather is I'll create an echo to see if something is happening there. And before that, I'll just take a quick look at the code. All right, the code looks decent. File get contents, get posts. Here we're calling get posts, and we're requiring the wrong file. Posts model/posts, and so I'll go ahead and revise that. I'll commit this, and that's also something, it's those little things. So for example, with Rails and scaffolding, that wouldn't have happened because they would create this file, all of this kind of these little things for me. All the low-level things are things you don't have to worry about, but they can be good to understand. For example, when you're debugging things. So there are trade-offs both ways. So right now it's starting my MySQL 5.5 cartridge. It's activating my deployment. It's already completed that process. And once my MySQL 5.5 cartridge is up, we should be good. And now, if I hit posts, there we go. There's my response. All the information from my Rails database, or rather my MongoDB database that's connected to my Rails application running on my Ruby server is coming into my PHP application through this API call. All right. And so that's the goal. Get to work, have fun, and we'll have support information in the video as well on Code Cloud Me.